Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel braced and on high alert, ready to hit back if Iran strikes. Plus, fire from the sky, the increasing capabilities of Hezbollah. How the next conflict in the north will be different from 2006. And looking at possible paths to peace and prosperity. Former Ambassador David Friedman offers an alternative to the two-state solution. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Tucker Carlson just released a digital bombshell that could affect the world's perception about Israel's relationship with Christians. In his 45-minute interview on X with Arab Lutheran pastor Munther Isaac, the Bethlehem pastor alleges that Israel is actively persecuting Palestinian Christians, particularly in Gaza. Pastor Isaac is an advocate of the BDS movement, promotes the idea that Jesus was a Palestinian, and denies the Jewish people's historical connection to Israel. During the entire interview, neither he nor Tucker made any condemnation of Hamas's actions on October 7th. In response on X, Israeli Aramean pastor Shadi Halul gave a very different perspective.
There are 180,000 Christian Israeli citizens who live, most of them, in our Galilee region, not in Bethlehem, not under Palestinian Authority. They would prefer to live under Jewish state where it has a democratic laws and not under any other Palestinian state or Arab state where they have Islamic Sharia laws.
As the war in Gaza continues, Israel is on high alert in anticipation for a possible retaliatory attack from Iran. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has more.
Touring an Air Force base, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, while the war in Gaza continues, the military is ready for fights in other areas as well.
We're in the middle of the war in Gaza, which continues in full force. At the same time, we continue our non-stop efforts to return our hostages, but we are also preparing for scenarios of challenges from other arenas.
Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari says if Iran does attack, it's proof they intend to escalate the fighting in the Middle East.
In the last few months, we have improved and advanced our offensive capabilities, and we will know how to act where needed.
We established a simple principle: whoever hurts us, we hurt him. We are preparing to meet the security needs of the State of Israel, both in defense and in attack.
Iran is promising to retaliate for what is widely believed to have been an Israeli strike, destroying Iran's consulate in Damascus and killing top Iranian military commanders. Middle East expert Yigal Carmon told CBN News Tehran has a mega plan to bring the Middle East under Shiite Iranian hegemony through the use of proxies, and it won't be distracted by the bombing.
Their immediate target is the Kingdom of Jordan. They go for the big thing. The big thing is to cause demonstration that will remove the king of Jordan. And that, if they succeed, will be an immensely devastating blow to Israel. To have a border of 500 kilometers on the other side, to have militias like in Iraq.
With the threat of an attack by Iran in the headlines, the State Department is warning its staffers here in Israel to limit their travel to the areas around Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and the southern city of Beersheba. The U.S. is promising to back Israel if Iran attacks, and the top American military commander for the Middle East region is in Israel to coordinate with the Israeli military.
The goal of the operation is, of course, to destroy Hamas's ability to rehabilitate itself in the area.
Some believe Iran doesn't want a major escalation in the Middle East, but Israel is making it clear it will be ready if Iran does strike. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, the enemy on Israel's northern border. New capabilities, new threats. Following Israel's partial pullout from South Gaza, attention focuses on the northern border threat from Hezbollah. The latest move is the Israeli military announcing its move from defense to attack mode. Israeli residents remaining in the region grow more anxious, especially with reports of Hezbollah being more dangerous than ever. George Thomas has more from the border city of Kiryat Shmona.
Toby Abutbul knows just how fortunate he is to be still alive. February 13th at 11:08 in the morning, Abutbul was driving down Main Street in Kiryat Shmona, a city in northern Israel near Lebanon's border, when his car's dash cam captures the moment a Hezbollah missile lands a few feet away from him.
I was driving on the streets of the city, and an anti-tank missile hits right in front of me with no warning. There wasn't even a siren sound warning of an incoming missile.
He immediately stops, puts his car in park, turns on the hazard lights, jumps out and takes cover behind his car. 10 seconds later, the second missile hits, injuring a mother and her child. And then come the sirens. 3 months earlier, on November 2nd, Hezbollah launched a barrage of 12 missiles at northern Israel, 2 of the missiles hitting right next to Abutbul's restaurant. Surveillance video shows the moment his father and 2 siblings enter the family restaurant and the missile's impact fling them to the floor, but not seriously injured.
It was scary. My little sisters and father were here with me, but we quickly got into the bunker, and we understood that there's no room for playing games. This is very serious.
5 months later, he's nervous about what's coming.
I believe Israel and Hezbollah are going to go to war.
The traffic lights here in downtown Kiryat Shmona are blinking because there's, as you can see, hardly any traffic to speak of. It's a scene that is played out pretty much all along the Israel-Lebanon border. Some 60,000 Israelis forced to evacuate from cities like this. But you know, back in 2006, when Israel and Hezbollah were last at war, the circumstances and the situations were much different. And today, Hezbollah is a much more powerful army. What is different about this conflict compared to 2006?
Hezbollah is different. Hezbollah is much stronger, much more munition, accurate missiles, and a capability of invasion.
Every day. Former IDF intelligence officer Sarit Zahavi is a leading expert on Hezbollah. She's tracked the various weapons being used by the terror group here in the north since October 8th, the day after the Hamas massacre. In addition to more than 3,000 rockets, Zahavi says for the first time Hezbollah began firing more advanced Iranian-made weapons like the Almas-1 anti-tank guided missile.
Low-flying, long-flying, short-range, very accurate, no alerts, no Iron Dome cannot intercept
Israel
this.
cannot protect itself from the infrared.
Only if they are launched against tanks, but they are usually launched against everything else. Everything, not just everything, civilian, military, whatever.
In January, Hezbollah released this video reportedly showing an Alma-1 with a camera attached to its nose targeting an IDF intelligence base.
Instead of a terrorist organization, we are facing a terrorist army. Army that has around 200,000 different kind of missiles, drones, rockets, mortars, different types, can get to everywhere in Israel.
Hezbollah is also believed to have about 100,000 fighters.
Hundreds of Hezbollah terrorists took part in what they described as a military maneuver.
The so-called tip of Hezbollah's spear is the Radwan Force, an elite squad of up to 3,000 fighters focused on infiltrating Israel's northern border.
Since they participated in the civil war in Syria, their ground forces are much more professionals, much more equipped, and even, you know what, even motivated to carry out the ground invasion because, you know, during the years, Hezbollah mobilized them that this is their mission.
IDF released video of a strike in South Lebanon that allegedly took out a senior Radwan commander. Fighter jets also struck a reported Radwan military compound.
Since Hezbollah opened the northern front against Israel, IDF attacked 4,000 targets in Lebanon. 10% of these are against the commando units of Hezbollah. This is a very impressive number.
Zahavi says a major challenge the IDF would face in a full-scale war would be trying to identify Hezbollah foot soldiers and weapons depots. As CBN discovered on a recent trip inside South Lebanon, the terror group is very adept at hiding within the civilian population.
Hezbollah, like Hamas, is entrenched in the villages using the Lebanese human shields. Everything you saw happening in Gaza with regard to hiding the munition in the hospitals and in the mosques and in the homes, it exists the same way with Hezbollah.
Israeli military has announced it's preparing to move from defense to attack regarding operations on the northern border. Experts predict war between Hezbollah and Israel is likely within the next 6 to 8 months.
I know the IDF is here. Yeah. I know that we are much more prepared than we used to be. And yet I'm worried.
Zahavi's home here in northern Israel sits less than 5 miles from Hezbollah military positions.
We are not willing to sleep next to this monster anymore. We want the threat to be dealt because what we have learned that once they have the capability to slaughter us, eventually they will use this capability. The only way to fight this is to try to eliminate or at least damage as much as possible this capability.
George Thomas, CBN News, Northern Israel.
Up next, Ambassador David Friedman with a creative proposal for an alternative to the two-state solution. Can you imagine an Israel in which Israeli citizens and all those living in Judea and Samaria prospered? Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman is part of a group proposing a creative one-state solution to bring peace and prosperity to all residents. Take a look. Ambassador Friedman, thanks for joining us again on CBN News. At the NRB, you presented a plan for peace here in the Middle East. You call it the future of Judea and Samaria. What is that plan?
Well, first of all, it's a plan that I think makes the most sense for all the inhabitants of this region, and it was something that I began to work on with more energy when I saw the Biden administration trying to push upon Israel a two-state solution, which I think would be suicide for Israel to undertake. It would really create an existential threat to the state of Israel. But you can't just keep saying no all the time, right? I mean, you actually have to, when people say, well, you don't want that, what are you for? And so I thought it made sense to put on a piece of paper and to get more granular on what I think is the right future for Judea and Samaria. And the way I describe it very simply is, you hear all these ugly demonstrations around the United States where people say, Palestine from the river to the sea, or from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So I just think it's mostly right. I just say from the river to the sea, Israel will be free, right? I mean, I think that's the distinction. I think Israel needs to have sovereignty over its territory from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, look, obviously, that's theologically sound. God gave this land to the Jewish people, and I think many people are uncomfortable with the idea of Israel ever giving away God's land, and I feel that way as well. But it's also a win-win outcome for all the people that live there. A Palestinian state, we tried it just now in Gaza. We had one for some number of years. There was no Jews living in Gaza. There were Israeli soldiers living in Gaza, and it became a terror state. And we can now say really with certainty if the Palestinians have a state in Judea and Samaria, it'll be a terror state as well. Why wouldn't it be? So we have to move away from terrorism and move more towards peace and prosperity. If you look around the region, whether it's Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Gaza Strip, the average GDP per capita is about $3,000-4,000. Israel, it's over $50,000. I mean, if the people living in Judea and Samaria, Jews and Arabs, are to have a future of prosperity, it has to be in conjunction with the state of Israel. And so, what I envision is that the communities that are in existence now, the Arab communities in Judea and Samaria, will stay there, right? And they'll receive permanent residency, the right to stay, the right for their children to stay, the right to travel. They won't receive the right to vote in a national election because it doesn't make any sense to swap a military risk for a demographic risk. But Puerto Rico doesn't have the right to vote in national elections either. They've made peace with that. They think it's ultimately in their interests to have the relationship with the United States that they do. And hopefully we build something like that here, where the relationship that Israel can bring to the communities, to the Palestinian communities in Judea and Samaria, will be additive and increase the quality of their lives. At the same time, Israel needs to retain security control. I look at it almost simply, that what we need to offer a carrot, as well as a stick, in this region. We're always saying that, we have to root out terrorists. Israel needs to continue to root out terrorists. There's no substitute for rooting out terrorists. If you don't root them out, they will come and kill you. But there has to be, an opportunity as well. So I think the message from Israel to the Palestinian communities in Judea and Samaria are, I think primarily, tell us what you want. I mean, if you want to kill us, if that's really what you want to do, like they want to do in Gaza, well, we're going to kill you first, because we're not going to allow ourselves to be killed. But to those of you, and we assume it's a much larger number, that want to work with us, right? We need to go to our friends in the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and throughout the world and help create in these regions better infrastructure, better roads, better schools, better hospitals. There has to be more control over the curricula so people aren't told to hate Jews anymore. And to do this, it's really a generational process. It's not overnight. You're not going to flick a switch. But over the course of a generation, to create better opportunities, more prosperity, less hatred, and to do it under the umbrella of Israeli sovereignty. I think that's something which is really a win-win. I mean, I don't think anyone, can accuse Israel of being hostile to their minority interests. Listen, Israel does a very good job with its minority populations. It always has. I mean, there's almost 2 million Arabs living inside of Israel. And, some of them are the best doctors in the best hospitals. Some of them run some of the largest, financial institutions in the country. So Israel knows how to integrate with its Arab population. They can expand that into Judea and Samaria as long as it doesn't result in Israel ceasing to become a Jewish state. That's sort of where you have to draw the line. So I think at large issues like who gets to vote for the prime minister, I think there have to be limitations on the ability of the Palestinian people who've been hostile to Israel for so long to alter the Jewish character of the state. But in terms of, their zoning rights, their building roads and highways and businesses, Israel needs to help. The Gulf needs to help. And I think that ultimately, will resolve, a good amount of the friction. We may never end it, but it's a whole lot better for everyone, for the Palestinians and for the Israelis, than having a two-state solution.
Well, it's a bold plan, and out of the stretching the envelope, but from someone who helped bring the Abraham Accords, sounds like it could work.
It's God's help.
Amen.
Friends from the beginning. More from Israeli-American filmmaker Dan Gordon on the historic connections between Christians and Zionism when we come back.
Israeli-American filmmaker Dan Gordon currently is working on a series of documentaries about October 7th. Here's a continuation of our interview about that and his desire to inform Jewish Americans about the historic connections between Christians and Zionism, which were central at the beginning of modern Israel.
The best friends that Israel has are American Christians, are evangelicals. They're the most important friends. And what people don't understand, neither my Jewish friends, nor my Israeli friends, nor my Christian friends, is that the Zionist enterprise, the return of the people of Israel to the land of Israel, has always been a joint Christian-Jewish endeavor. It has never been just a Jewish endeavor. At every step, there has been a Christian who has felt the Lord moving him to step up to exactly the right person at exactly the right time. William Heckler was a pastor in Vienna. He was the pastor at the British Embassy. And I think it was 1894, he literally had a visitation from the Lord who said, get ready, because in 4 years something that is going to happen that's going to make the return of the Jewish people to Israel possible. His friends thought he was insane. His family thought he was crazy. And then he picked up this pamphlet called The Jewish State. It was a little pamphlet printed by Theodor Herzl, and he went, oh, this is what I was ready for. He found Herzl, went to his apartment, and said, I'm here to help you fulfill the vision of the Jewish state. And Herzl thought he was a madman, and he said, well, that's very nice, I appreciate it, thank you very much, but the Jews don't take me seriously, the Christians don't take me seriously, no one takes me seriously, so unless you can arrange a meeting with one of the crowned heads of Europe, you're of no use to me. And Pastor Heckler said, will Kaiser Wilhelm do? And that meeting made the formation of the Zionist movement possible. In 1898, it was the first Zionist conference, and Herzl said at that conference, in no more than 50 years, the Jewish state will be a reality. 1898 to 1948, 50 years on the button. If you go into World War I, John Henry Patterson was the Christian commander of the Jewish Legion of the British Army, which was the first Jewish fighting force in 2,000 years, and fought at the Battle of Megiddo, fought in the Sinai campaign, made the British victory possible, which opened up the way to the State of Israel. Ord Wingate in the 1930s was a British member of the Plymouth Brethren, devout Christian, who was a captain in the intelligence who was tasked with protecting the British pipeline from Iraq to Haifa. He had in his mind, I'm going to create the Jewish army for the future Jewish state. And amongst his young recruits was a young chap by the name of Moshe Dayan, and the rest of the fathers of the Israeli army. The Israeli army was founded by Ord Wingate in the 1930s. Harry Truman, against the advice of the man he admired most in the world, George Marshall, who was the Secretary of State, recognized Israel 11 minutes after its founding. So everywhere you go on the timeline, the founding and the establishment and the protection of the State of Israel has always been a joint Christian-Jewish project. There's a reason for that. There's a reason. God's in charge. So it's important to me to strengthen, to embrace my Christian brethren and friends, and to say, you need to know about 4 things. You need to know what the horrors were. You need to hear the stories of heroism when the government failed totally, and the army failed completely, and the intelligence community failed completely. The citizens of Israel stepped up and saved the State of Israel. They saved their families and they saved the country. You also need to know about the hysteria and the hatred that has come up since then, and you really need to know the history of this place, because we are the indigenous people of this land. The last time this was an independent state, a sovereign state, before the State of Israel, it was called Judah, and its residents were Jews, and they spoke Hebrew, and they worshiped the God of Israel, and they faced Jerusalem, and their holy temple was in Jerusalem. The Palestinians speak Arabic. They worship a religion which is called Islam that comes from Mecca in Arabia. The Prophet Muhammad is from Mecca in Arabia. They speak a language called Arabic. All these Arabian influences aren't indigenous here. They came here through conquest and colonization. The Jews never left this land. We were a minority. But since when does being a minority in your own land rob you of your indigenous rights? If that was the case, Native Americans would no longer be called indigenous because they were long ago outnumbered by people of European and African descent. The final thing that I want to make people aware of in this show is the hope, and there is going to be a tiny window of hope once Hamas is eliminated. Something good actually can come out of this. And American Christians can play a huge, huge part in that, because American Christians make the difference in elections. They can say which people are going to be in Congress, which people are going to set foreign policy, which people do they believe have the wisdom to be God's vessel.
Quite a powerful message, and we look forward to those documentaries. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. You can follow us on social media and access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And please continue to pray for the IDF soldiers, for all those caught in harm's way, and for the return of the hostages. And as always, the peace of Jerusalem. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.